Hi, everyone, and welcome to People Tech, the podcast of WorkforceAI.news. I'm Mark Pfeffer. And today, let me introduce you to Maria Colacurcio, the CEO of Syndio, which provides intelligence that helps employers make decisions about their pay. Maria, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Sure. Let's start with the basics. Can you tell me how employers are using pay intelligence today?
Absolutely. And then I would love to hear from you. I mean, you've been covering this space for years, and I've listened to a ton of your stuff. And as we talk, I'm really interested to know what you're hearing as the common complaints from HR leaders, because the ones I'm hearing and the way that decision intelligence is really helping is that every company is sort of stuck in a compensation coordination crisis. So when you think about a single employee and how many different people and moments decide that employee's compensation, it's really immeasurable. Then you think about all of the elements that go into that that employee's compensation, whether that's market pricing, internal employee pay data, pay equity, job leveling, career ladders, job architecture, all of those things. And I think the result is that we treat pay as an individual transaction when it's actually a massive network effect. And so this is where there's sort of a confluence of things happening with the acceleration of pay transparency and AI transformation that's finally enabling us to take all of that information and make in the moment a really precise recommendation leveraging AI as to what someone should be paid, and then track that network or butterfly effect over time as things change in the organization. And I think it's a super exciting moment that really gets at a pain point, which is pay decisions are made in a black box. They're made in silos, and they're not necessarily aligned to what companies value.
Does every employer, every company sort of understand that pay is beyond simply writing a check or making a bank transfer? There's more to it, and it does deserve intelligence and study?
I certainly hope so. I mean, pay is really a signal into what we value as an organization. So if you think about when you go to work, you're trading your time, your labor for something in return. And if our company is really clear and articulate about what it takes to get an increase in pay and compensation, for example, then you're really clear on the areas and skills that you need to develop as an employee to do better, to earn more. And the big disconnect right now is there's so many people out there trading their labor. And they don't really know what elements of the composition of their skills, experience, personality, maybe some of the softer things that they're really good at, persuasive techniques, things of that nature. They actually don't really know which elements of their labor are the ones that are driving the most value. And companies aren't necessarily articulating that. And that's a big part of a lot of the legislation that's running through Europe with the EU Pay Transparency Directive, is trying to get at the heart of, why do you compensate people the way that you do? What are the particular things that actually matter when you're trying to drive these decisions?
I think you're right about what you said about pay being decided in a black box. It's actually one of the subjects that doesn't come up very much in the conversations I had. But I know that there's like a whole culture around pay and pay technology and compensation technology. What are the pain points, though, that employers have to address? And I mean, what are they using the intelligence for specifically? When we talk about pay intelligence, can you break it down for me and tell me what people are after?
Yes. So I think it boils down into three major issues. The first issue being that pay decisions are inconsistent. So if you think about all the work a team will do, and typically the compensation team is heads down doing this every single year for several months on what are their comp philosophies? What does that career ladder look like? What's the job architecture? What's the framework? And then you get into pay decisions, and you're month one into the year being kicked off after all of this work is done. And pay decisions are really inconsistent, meaning if for a particular set of job roles, the comp philosophy says that the company values education, but there's been three sort of special snowflake candidates that have come in that are not highly educated, but the hiring manager really wants them because they've got this other special thing, typically those offers are made. Maybe they're made with a lot of discretion outside of range, and it's never really tracked in terms of a feedback loop as to, well, wait a minute, it didn't follow our comp philosophy, meaning they're not highly educated. We said we value education. And then the reasons why the discretion was driving a higher price point also wasn't documented. So we don't really learn anything from that transaction. And then fast forward, 6, 12 months, whether that employee does well or not may lead back to give us information on, was that a good premium, but we don't really know. So they're inconsistent. They're sort of filled with discretion. There's lots of discretion. There's wide ranges. People can go up to the top of range. It can go down to the middle. It's not consistent in terms of how the comp philosophy is applied. That's the biggest block number one of problems. Number two is that it's inefficient. So when you think about another area where AI can really help is that sometimes comp teams are involved in every single escalation or every comp decision, and that's just not efficient, particularly for a large company that's operating at scale. And so how are exceptions being made? How are you doing that within the workflow the teams are actually leveraging, like Teams or Slack? Where are these streamlined processes? Where are these decisions being made? And typically what we hear is that they're being made still in email or in one of these chat apps where they're going back and forth and saying, well, we really need to up the offer. This person market hasn't quite caught up. We're using lagging surveys. Can we get approvals? So they're inefficient. And then the last one I would say is that they're happening in silos, as we discussed. But what that means is you lack insight. So there's no sort of full circle feedback loop, or what I like to call the butterfly effect of pay decisions. And I'll give you an example. And this is where AI and decision intelligence is so powerful. So let's say you're a tech company and you're applying a pretty hefty premium to garner tech talent from folks like Google or Meta or OpenAI. So you have a premium that's like, if they're ex-Google, we're going to give this hefty premium because we believe that is going to really help drive revenue in our company or drive innovation or drive something. So where AI can play a role is you can start to track across the life cycle of that employee things like performance ratings, things like employee engagement, things like attrition, things like, do they stay? Do they get promoted? If they get promoted, what is the level of promotion to which they get promoted to? And let's say in that example, you've got a trend where this premium of we pay a big sum to someone because they're ex-Google isn't really playing out the way you hoped. Maybe those folks leave sooner. They have terrible performance reviews. They're rated by their peers as not being super collaborative. What AI can then do in decision intelligence is provide a recommendation back upstream to say, we would recommend this maybe isn't the best premium for your company. Because when we look at the butterfly effect of decisions and outcomes, actual business outcomes that result in that premium, the extra dollar you're putting into the system for that ex-Google rating or premium or characteristic is not driving an additional dollar to the business.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like there's going to be some subjectivity in here. You mentioned something about looking at a candidate and trying to figure out whether or not they fit on the team. How do you decide the value of fitting into the team or fitting into the culture?
There's a lot of discussion about this. So right now there's so much discretion, particularly in these wide ranges that are being communicated. And so a lot of times I believe the precision is really around what is it going to take to land the candidate. Companies want to be competitive, particularly in a hot space. Maybe they're going after AI talent or something like that. They want to be competitive with market. That's really important. But you also have to keep in mind where you're introducing compression to existing employees. And where you introduce compression to existing employees is where you can start really driving down the culture. Because if you and I are working at a company and the company says, we are a pay for performance company and we believe in these things and here's why you're paid what you're paid, but then we're consistently being outpaid by people with our same skills and experiences that the company's bringing in from the outside at a higher pay, that's really going to make us feel crappy about how the company values us as long tenured employees. And it's one of the biggest drivers of attrition. So when you think about that culture fit, that moment in an interview cycle where it's sort of the beer test, a lot of people call it, like, would I have a beer with this person? Like, is this person going to be a good culture fit on our team? I think the more that you can start to drive discipline around defining what that means, the better outcomes you're going to have, because the more you can explain it to existing team members. So you want to be able to identify and define what makes a good culture fit, because that way you can start to teach, coach, upskill existing team members who may not have those characteristics. But if it really just is kind of a vibe check, like, I like you, I'm not really sure why, but I'm going to put that in the calculus of what you should be paid, I think that's very dangerous territory. And that's where a lot of bias can creep in.
And I would think that the way companies approach pay intelligence and use it kind of evolves with the times. I mean, people looking at pay and trying to figure out a pay strategy 2 years ago probably were under very different pressures than they're under today, as the economy seems to soften and the job market's changing. Do you find that's true? Are executives worried about different things now?
The executives I'm talking to are all 100% focused on cost efficiency. And I think that's a big output of what we're seeing from this first phase of AI transformation. We are starting to see some folks now in phase two. Ironically, in manufacturing, I'm seeing a lead there where they're starting to think of AI not only as a cost efficiency tool, but an innovation tool from the perspective of how can we leverage this technology to build more competitive products and embed this into our products. But from the bulk, when you think about cost efficiency, when budgets tighten and everyone's focused on downsizing costs, so using AI as a way to get more efficient is sort of the talk track. But when budgets get tighter, the cost of bad pay decisions just completely multiply. So when you think about what decision intelligence enables you to do, you can turn compensation from being sort of the biggest line item on the P&L to becoming a strategic advantage, because now you have the confidence that you're paying precisely what you need to pay, not a penny more, not a penny less, to be competitive and get the right talent, but also that you're tracking, again, that comp philosophy and the why you pay what you pay, and making sure that those are the right things that drive business outcomes. So I think when you're in a moment of cost efficiency, budget optimization, you don't want to pay for premiums, like I mentioned in the last example, that actually don't pay out for your company in terms of outcome. And I think that becomes really important. I think I've heard over and over again, you've probably heard this too. Actually, I'm curious if you've heard this, where, somebody leaves, a very highly paid executive or something, and the conversation is like, man, such a bummer we had to separate that person because we really paid up for them. It's like, what does that mean, you paid up for them? It means you paid a premium, and that premium didn't work out for you because this person ended up having to be separated. And so I think the power of AI and transformation is you can start to identify trends via insights and analytics as to what are the premiums that do work out for your company. So how do you use that as a competitive advantage? How do you get efficiency gain on that largest expense? And how do you move from being reactive to sort of just letting this happen to you to getting really proactive? And that's sort of the things we talk about. Like, I'm looking at market rate, and I have a group of employees over here, 3 of whom are very high performers who have now moved below where market would put them. That means they're at risk of leaving. So I can be much more proactive now using decision intelligence to identify maybe an off-cycle increase for those folks, because I don't want them to drop below market.
It seems like there's kind of a divergence in some ways, where I think disconnect is a better word. You were talking about somebody who leaves even though they were being paid a premium. One of the things I hear a lot is that employees don't really stick around for pay as much as they do for their contribution, how they're treated, what the potential is for them in the company. Basically soft things. Mm-hmm. So it would seem that the executive or the employer has to really balance all of this pay intelligence with encouraging or supporting those softer things. And the disconnect I'm wondering about is, do they really do that, or do they let the pay drive it?
I think this all comes back to empowering your people managers around explainability. And this, again, can be such a competitive differentiation. And I think when managers do a really good job of explaining, I have a team of 12 people and I just promoted Robert. And instead of that happening sort of on the side and everyone hearing about it, from an email, the manager getting folks together and saying, here's why, let's all celebrate Robert. Let's celebrate Robert's promotion. And here's why Robert was promoted. Here are the skills and characteristics and attributes and qualities that Robert has shown that has positioned him into a place where he had this opportunity to achieve more and get promoted. And here's what the rest of you, the 11 of you, and maybe these are one-on-one conversations or coaching, need to do to be put in the same position. Because I think one of the things you're talking about in that softer bucket is not necessarily the dollar value on the paycheck, but it's people feeling like they're not seen, they're not valued, and they don't really have a clear path to earn more or to move up in the organization, because managers aren't explaining those moments of promotion, those moments of movement internally. They're not explaining or articulating the underlying reasons why those things have happened.
So when you have a customer actually two questions. First, are your customers new to this concept, or are they basically building their skills here and they've used somebody else and they just like you better?
It's a great question. So I think decision intelligence for pay is quite new. I think our customers have been struggling with these problems for a long time. We have about 350 companies on the Syndio platform. And what we started with were solutions around pay equity, comp consistency analytics, and pay policy analytics. So if you think about the world from which our existing customers started and where they're going, they're very accustomed to, number one, looking at predicted pay versus actual. And the reason for that is when you do a pay equity analysis, it's not unlawful to pay people differently, but you need to have disciplined reasons why you're doing that. And that's part of doing a pay equity analysis, is to say, I've got a group of employees doing similar work, and the reason I pay a premium in this group of workers is for, let's just say, tenure and education. And so then you look at, is that true or not true? Because if that's true, we would predict that these certain folks are going to get paid a lot and these other folks are not going to get paid as much. We're going to run a linear regression and we're going to figure it out. So if you think about where our customers have come from and that they've been doing these types of analyses, 2 to 4 times a year. And then we layered on top of that a bunch of analytics elements in the software that enabled them to see what are the policies and behaviors driving these decisions. Do you have a particular manager that tends to promote somebody that happens to have a certain set of skills or characteristics? You can get really detailed in identifying what are the behaviors and policies that actually drive pay in your organization. And what's fascinating about that is most of the time, the things that companies say drive pay don't actually drive pay. And you can identify this when you start looking into things like comp consistency analytics. So I think for our customers, the transition into something like decision intelligence for pay and leveraging AI to help recommend precise recommendations for comp packages for starting pay, promotions, transfers, et cetera, is a really natural extension of what they've already been doing, because they've been looking at and are comfortable with this idea of, we have pay policies, we have reasons why we pay what we pay, we identify and analyze whether we're sticking to that and whether those are true, and or if they're causing us issues, meaning they're creating pay gap issues, particularly gender pay gap issues. I think for a company that hasn't done any of those things, that maybe is new to analysis, new to even pay equity or thinking about their pay policies, the first step is really going to be articulating clearly, are you reflecting in your job architecture, your career frameworks, the things that you value and want to pay a premium for? And that's kind of step one, as to like, what do you value? What are the things that drive pay in your organization?
Well, one more question, which I think will be fairly simple, but tell me about Syndio. How does Syndio fit into all of this?
So the Syndio platform is a foundational platform that's technology that provides everything that I just described in terms of analysis around why do you pay what you pay policies, pay equity analysis, addressing things like compliance and global pay reporting, which are required across 27 jurisdictions now in the EU and the US. And what we've announced recently is an additional AI native layer on top of that, which is Syndio. And what Syndio does is takes all of that information in terms of the rich foundation and integrations to all of your data sources, both structured and unstructured. So structured, what that means is like your employee database, your offer database, market surveys that you use, but also all of the documentation around your policies. So your comp philosophy, all of those things that we already have access to because we've been doing at the foundation of the Syndio platform analysis on these things for years. So a new customer would come in and we would analyze all of those things, give them a readout of here's what you pay for today. And then what Syndio does is takes all of those things and in a real-time way makes a precise recommendation to a recruiter. If they're in the midst of talking to a candidate, here's exactly the package you should offer this candidate, which gives you a competitive edge to get the candidate in the door, but also takes into account all of these other things. Like it doesn't mess up your pay equity. It doesn't put a bunch of high performing existing employees at risk, all of these other things. And then you can apply that same product, Syndio, to promotions, transfers, any sort of pay decision that's happening in the company. And you can do it just as you would a Teams chat. You can chat with Syndio in Teams or Slack. And it's really an accessible way to get to something that, quite frankly, so if I, as a human, wanted to do this, I absolutely could, but it would take me weeks. If I'm making you a job offer and I want to do it right, I could just ask Syndio, what should, here's the candidate, here's the skills and experiences, here's the JD. Syndio orchestrates a bunch of agents under the hood to go get to the precise offer. I could do that myself. I could go pull the market surveys. I could go look at our last 15 offers that are in the same cohort. I could pull from my HRIS employee data set. I could do all these things, but it's going to take me 3 weeks to get to that single offer that now with AI is possible in seconds, which is super exciting.
Well, Maria, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to talk with me. This has actually been fascinating.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
I've been talking to Maria Colacurcio, the CEO of Syndio, and this has been People Tech, the podcast of WorkforceAI.news. You can find us on the Work Defined Podcast Network. They're at WRKDefined.com. And to keep up with AI technology and HR, follow WorkforceAI.news. We're the most trusted source of news in the HR tech industry. And we're at www.workforceai.news. I'm Mark Pfeffer, and see you next time.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now. You call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time, 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.